For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Saneh Dlamini. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Sattner joins me to discuss social grants, the judiciary and politics. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Why are you so concerned with whether the Constitutional Court makes decisions on political matters?
You know, from a democratic point of view, it is very important that an unelected body should not be making decisions which affect political life, because we elect people to do that. And the judiciary is not elected. It's an appointed body, and it has to be very careful about when it enters into political issues. For example, the Nkandla issue, the question of whether the government could be compelled to hold a vote of no confidence, the Speaker could be compelled to hold a vote of no confidence vote, and now this social grants issue. And I think it's important to ask ourselves why it is that there is this space where the judiciary steps in. And I think the way we need to understand it is to look at the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. Under apartheid, all laws were made, if they were properly made by Parliament, there's nothing the courts could do about it. Now, it's not just apartheid. In Britain, what a man called Dicey once said, Parliament can make and unmake any law. It is totally sovereign. Now, the South African Constitution and the American Constitution, as it happens, are different in the sense that if a law is passed and it's contrary to the Constitution, the citizens and various other bodies can apply to the court, the Supreme Court in America, ultimately, and in South Africa, the Constitutional Court, to set it aside. Now, the court is assumed then to have a certain professional insight into constitutional matters that makes it appropriate for them to make a decision whether or not this law conforms to the vision and the provisions of the Constitution. The vision of the Constitution is again very different from apartheid South Africa, but it's also different from most other countries in the world. It's a very advanced constitution in regard to certain rights, in regard to gender, sexuality, things like that. And there are some parts of the Constitution where the court has had to decide, and personally I don't always agree with the way in which they have depicted themselves. We are not saying that the judges are of a sort of higher morality than any other human being on earth. What we are saying is they're professionally trained and they have to absorb the ethos of the Constitution in a way that enables them to make decisions on these matters. Now, if you look at the Constitutional Court case on the death penalty, some of the statements by the court, by judges, gave the impression that the rest of the population, or many of the population, could be swayed by the emotions and things like this. The judges said they were different, you see. They were dispassionate and they could simply apply their minds. And I think that type of statement has a problem in that it can be read in an elitist way, that ordinary people can't think about these things. So that wouldn't be the reason why I would say they are justified in entering these matters. I'm saying there is something called professionalism of the judiciary, which they tend to absorb and tends to lead them to make decisions that go beyond party political interests. Even under apartheid, there were situations where there was room for the judges to make decisions that were contrary to apartheid, And they made these decisions in terms of a sort of ethos that the legal profession saw as applicable to itself. There are sort of ideas like all being equal before the law, so that they took positions that they had to interpret laws in a way that removed liberty as far as possible. Not all judges, but some judges. So I think it's very important that we understand that the fact that the judges have stepped in the SASSA case, they didn't ask to step in. The fact they've been called in has been because if you look at Parliament, Parliament doesn't seem to be very worried about the social grants. Zuma doesn't seem to be worried. Dlamini doesn't seem to be worried. And I think Black Sash brought this action, and Freedom Under Law joined them in order to compel, to get the court to make a finding that would regulate what seems to have been a very irregular process in regard to the contract with CPS, the sharing of information with CPS commercial entities, which led to deductions from grant recipients.
So if the government does not want the courts to step in, how have they allowed the SASSA crisis to unfold?
Well, you know, the evidence shows that, first of all, the first time they made the contract, it was illegal. They didn't have a proper bidding process. And after that, even though it was an unlawful contract, the court allowed the contract with CPS to continue, provided that SASSA took steps to start a new bidding process and install a new service provider. It could be CPS again, but subject to it being a regularized process. After a few years, CPS reported falsely to the court that not CPS, SASSA reported that they would take over the process in-house. In fact, they didn't have the capacity to do this, and they ought to have reported that to the court sooner than they did. Everything was done months after they knew, and they made what appeared to be false declarations of what they were doing. So you can't avoid something like this, which is of such great importance to something like 17 million people. You can't do something like this irregularly without expecting some comeback. And the recourse that people have is to go to the Constitutional Court, and Batabile, Dlamini, and others have made it impossible for people to do anything but that. And I think they can only, you need ethical leadership, and we don't really have ethical leadership.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Sattner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about social grants, the judiciary, and politics.